watch this, I'm gonna also put this into a little audio clip so that you can listen to it as a podcast type, because I think it's such an incredible story and it's such an important thing to understand when you're practicing Pilates, and to understand how this all came about. One thing to note is that Joseph Pilates did not call it Pilates, he called it Contrology when he created it, not Pilates. It was then changed or moved into Pilates once his legacy continued. So I have some notes in front of me, so if I look down, then you know why. I just want to make sure that I don't miss anything. Joseph Pilates was born in Germany in 1883, and he was born a pretty sick kid. He had some pretty bad respiratory issues, but because of this, he was really driven to try to improve his own health through physical activity. So with his father and his brother, he did fencing, boxing, wrestling, gymnastics, and when he became older, he was a boxer who was touring in England. And at the time of this tour in England, World War I broke out. And he became an alien resident at an internment camp in the Isle of Man for the duration of the war. So now he's, a prisoner of war. Are you a prisoner of war if you're in an internment camp? I guess I'll look that up. But anyway, he's stuck in a camp, and he's a restless person, as is, probably very hyperactive. So he's got to keep himself busy. And he comes up with this exercise routine that gets shared with his other detainees, and it must have gained a lot of popularity throughout camp, because he claims that all the men in his regiment did not get sick when the influenza virus broke out, because they were doing this exercise. But it must have gotten the attention of his higher ups in the camp, because they asked him to become an orderly in the hospital in the camp, which meant that he was now responsible for the recovery and treatment of 30 patients. That is where the Cadillac was kind of born. So he came up with this exercise equipment. He's dealing with all these men, and he's having to manually move them and help them build strength. Maybe he was trying to be their resistance, trying to really stretch them out so that they weren't getting bed sores and so they weren't getting atrophy. And he came up with this idea to put springs on the bed frame. And so now the men can work themselves out, and they can have some resistance. You can move your arms, and you can probably hook it into your foot, and you can have some resistance, and they were starting to build strength, they were starting to get better. They were coming from a place of less effort, laying down. Word got around that Joseph Pilates came up with this amazing form of rehabilitation, and he was approached by the brown shirts when he was released from the camp. The brown shirts would be soon called the Nazis. And so the Nazis approached him saying, "We want you to join our club." And he's like, "No, that's cool, I'm not gonna do that." And he ends up fleeing and going to the United States, which on the way over on the ship, he meets Clara, who becomes his wife. And they kind of breeze past that, and I would love to know more about that. That's such a romantic story. They're on their way to a new life, and then they meet, and she really had a big part in all of this as well. So the two of them go to New York. They end up renting a studio in the same building as New York City Ballet. And they start teaching Contrology. and the ballerinas from New York City Ballet and some really famous choreographers and famous dancers and famous people in the dance world, they go to him for all of their injuries because that's what he does. He's helping people build strength and get better from an injury. And he does that. He does that for the rest of his life in New York. And I'm not getting into too much of the detail. He ends up teaching a few select very important people in the Pilates community how to also teach it, and that's how it kind of grew a little bit. His wife, Romana, these are all people that you can look up and Google. He died without ever getting the recognition that he deserved. So during his lifetime, you know, he just was another person who was doing something that didn't have as much notoriety at the time. It wasn't until the 90s when it started to really blow up, and it got the recognition, it got some celebrity recognition, and so now here we are, even like 20 years after that, and Pilates is just scattered all over the place. And that's why it's very confusing to some people. And that's why it's still very popular, but everybody kind of has their own rendition of Pilates. But I think that the most important thing to take from his story is that it started as a rehabilitation method. It was to help people who were injured. It was to help people who were coming from a place of weakness to build them stronger. And that is the way that it should be taught today as well. It doesn't mean you have to have a disability or you have to have an injury to do Pilates, but it's a progressive form of movement. It's a whole body, mind-body connection, so it's like yoga in that way, where you're connecting from your mind to your body, and you're listening to your body. That is a similarity there. And it does have its progressions like yoga does, but for me, the most important thing about Pilates is the emphasis of pelvic and spinal mobility and stability. That this part of your trunk, this giant spine that goes from your tailbone all the way to the base of your neck, can really define your health. It really can. And it can cause a lot of issues if you don't give it the rehabilitation that it needs. Because we all need rehabilitation. We all need it, especially for aging. We need attention to these structures that we have inside, because life will bring us down, but Pilates will lift us up.